200 guests watched my sister turn the tiny brass wheel on my daughter's handmade sculpture. 3 soft chimes rang through the ballroom. A blue shard of glass caught the light, and Celeste's smile vanished. For 1 second, she looked terrified. Then she threw the gift into the trash beside Talia's wheelchair and sneered. "Cheap things belong with cheap people." My mother nodded. "Your child needs to learn her place." I picked up the bent sculpture, helped Talia transfer into the passenger seat, secured her wheelchair in the back, and drove away. Before I closed the door, I looked at my sister and parents and said, "Tomorrow, you'll learn yours." The next morning, all 3 came to my house, demanding that Talia tell the guests she had been confused. My lawyer called while they stood in my kitchen. I put Dana on speaker, and her first words were, "Before anyone deletes another file, you need to listen carefully. Before I take you back to where this began, I hope you are doing well wherever you are listening, and please stay with us to the end and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one." 6 weeks before my sister threw Talia's gift into the trash, I still believed the hardest battle in our lives was teaching my daughter's body to trust the floor again. On the 6th of July 2026, low clouds hung over Beaverton as I drove Talia toward the rehabilitation center at South Waterfront. The trip took 40 minutes, long enough for me to review my notes twice while traffic crawled toward Portland. I had recorded everything from the strength of her left hip to how many seconds she could sit unsupported before reaching for the mat. Talia watched me scroll. "Are you taking me to therapy or presenting me at the next quarterly meeting?" I locked my phone. "I'm keeping track." "You're keeping track of keeping track." Her voice was dry, but I heard the exhaustion beneath it. Just under 10 months earlier, she had been riding home with my sister when Celeste's Volvo left a wet curve and struck a roadside barrier. The official version said a black SUV had forced them out of the lane. No one had found it, but Celeste had called 911, kept Talia awake, and stayed until the ambulance arrived. In our family's version, my sister had become the hero who saved my daughter. Talia could guide her manual wheelchair through narrow doors and cross shallow thresholds without looking down. She still needed help with some transfers, especially when fatigue made her trunk control less reliable. I had learned how to steady her without pulling, but not how to stop preparing to catch her before she asked. Dr. Helena Ortiz met us in an examination room overlooking the river. She reviewed Talia's latest strength tests, then repeated what she had explained before. The injury was incomplete at T11. Talia retained some sensation below the damaged area and could inconsistently activate muscles around her hips and thighs, but those facts did not form a promise. "So the signals are still getting through," I said. "Doesn't that make walking more likely?" "It makes further recovery possible," Dr. Ortiz replied. "Possible is not predictable." "What percentage would you give her?" "I would not give a 14-year-old's future a percentage no one can defend." I tried again. "Have patients with this level of function walked?" "Some have gained limited walking with braces or support. Some have not. Talia's goals must include independence and quality of life now, not only an outcome we cannot guarantee." Beside me, Talia picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. She had heard this conversation so often that she no longer needed to look at either of us. Renee Walsh began the session with seated balance and trunk activation. Talia reached across her body for weighted rings, corrected herself when her shoulder drifted, and muttered that every rehabilitation tool looked designed for preschoolers. Renee laughed, then asked Miles Keaton to take over the next activity while she checked another patient. Miles was a licensed physical therapist assistant who also coordinated the adaptive sports program. He crouched near Talia without touching her chair and asked, "What do you want to accomplish today?" I answered first. "We were hoping to try the standing frame again." Miles kept his attention on her. "Is that your goal?" Talia glanced toward the art table across the room. It held wire, thin brass, colored glass, and tools with adapted grips. "I want to get over there without Mom moving half my body for me." Miles nodded toward the transfer board beneath her cushion. "Then that's the work." I moved automatically, one hand reaching toward her waist. Miles did not stop me. He asked Talia, "Do you want your mom's hands on you yet?" "Not yet." The words were calm, but they landed harder than anger. I stepped back. Miles positioned the chair, locked the brakes, and stayed close enough to guard without taking over. Talia placed the board, shifted her weight, and moved across in small increments. Halfway through, her arm trembled. I nearly reached for her, but she paused, breathed, and finished with only Miles's hand hovering near her shoulder. When she settled onto the bench, her cheeks were flushed. She looked at me as if waiting for the celebration she knew I could not contain. I swallowed it. "How did that feel?" "Like I moved 6 feet and survived your silence." Miles smiled. "That counts as a successful session." Avery Chen texted while Talia examined the tools. "Are you coming back to art class in the fall?" "I saved the window seat, but I will trade it for your metal cutters." Talia read the message twice. Avery had not asked whether she could stand, whether the doctors were hopeful, or whether she was being brave. She had asked whether Talia was coming back. Before she could answer, a phone chimed across the room. 3 soft notes, evenly spaced. Talia stopped breathing. Both hands clamped around the edge of the bench, then reached instinctively for the rims of her wheelchair. Her eyes fixed not on the phone, but on the hand holding it. The man looked down at the blue light, washing across his fingers. "Talia," I said. She blinked, but the room seemed far away. "Turn it off." The man silenced the phone and apologized. Miles lowered himself into her line of sight, leaving space between them. "You heard 3 sounds," he said. Then you looked at his hand. Talia's jaw tightened. "It was nothing." "Maybe. I'm only telling you what I saw." He did not call it a memory, or ask what it meant. He waited until her breathing slowed, then asked whether she wanted to continue or return to her chair. Talia chose the chair, and completed the transfer back with more help than before. On the drive home, clouds darkened beneath the overpasses. A navigation screen in the next lane cast a blue glow through another car's window, and Talia turned her face away. Questions about the chimes, the light, and the black SUV crowded my mind. I gripped the wheel and held to what Miles had actually observed. A cream envelope was waiting in our mailbox. Celeste's company logo was embossed across the flap in silver. It was an invitation to the 10th anniversary gala she had been planning for months. Talia ran her thumb across the lettering. "Aunt Celeste stayed with me until the ambulance came." "She did. I should make her something for the gala. Something that moves." I looked at my daughter, at the chair she handled with such skill and still wished she did not need, and at the invitation from the woman our family credited with saving her life. Talia had no idea why 3 chimes could steal the air from her lungs. Miles did not yet know Celeste had been driving that night, and I still believed gratitude was the safest story we had. By the time we got home, the cream invitation had left a faint line across Talia's palm. She kept it on her lap while I lowered the chairlift from the Cayenne. The car was an older model I had owned before the accident. Savings had paid for the rotating seat and wheelchair lift afterward. The ramp to our front door had been installed 3 weeks after Talia came home from inpatient rehabilitation. I had chosen cedar because I wanted it to look intentional. I had widened 2 doorways, lowered one section of the kitchen counter, moved her bedroom downstairs, and stored half my studio equipment so she could turn through the hall without scraping her knuckles. My 5-person architectural lighting studio and our savings had kept us stable, but long-term rehabilitation was already costing more than I could absorb indefinitely. I saw proof that we had adapted. Talia saw a house in which every decision had been made while she was still learning to sit upright. "You moved the lamp again," she said as she rolled into the living room. It was narrowing the turn. It was 6 inches from where I put it. "You caught your wheel on the cord yesterday." I also caught my sleeve on the bathroom handle. "Are we removing the bathroom?" Her voice was sharper than usual, but I knew better than to answer irritation with gratitude. I had once told her how lucky we were to afford the renovations, as though luck erased the fact that strangers had measured her bedroom while she was still in the hospital. I returned the lamp and taped down the cord. Talia watched me. "You don't have to fix everything the second I mention it." "I understand," I said, still holding the electrical tape. "You understand while doing exactly what I'm talking about." I asked where she wanted to work on Celeste's gift. She chose the old drafting table beside the north window, the one place I had not redesigned for her. It had belonged to my late husband, Daniel, Talia's father, who died when she was 8. He used it for model airplanes, and when Talia was small, he covered the surface with pencil marks showing where she thought the runway should go. I had offered to lower it after the accident. Talia refused. We compromised with an adjustable side table that slid beneath it. She placed the gala invitation against the wall and opened her sketchbook. "What are you making?" I asked. "I don't know yet. I know how it should move. I just don't know what it is." She drew 3 curved lines around a small wheel, then shaded one narrow shape in blue. Watching her work brought back the night Celeste called me from the side of a wet road. It was the 19th of September 2025. Rain had started after sunset, enough to make the outer roads slick. Celeste had taken Talia to help choose table linens for a charity dinner. At 8:47, my phone rang, and the first thing I heard was my sister shouting my daughter's name. By the time I reached the hospital, Celeste had told the same story to the officer, paramedics, and my parents. A black SUV had come too close on the curve. She swerved to avoid it. Her Volvo crossed the shoulder and struck the barrier. The other vehicle never stopped. There was no confirmed witness and no camera covering that section of road. Police never found a matching SUV, but they also had no immediate basis to accuse Celeste. The road was wet and poorly lit. What everyone could see was what she did afterward. She called 911, kept pressure on a cut near Talia's hairline, held her hand, and kept her talking until the ambulance arrived. For weeks, my mother repeated that Celeste had saved her life. Talia heard it while surgeons stabilized her spine. She heard it when nurses turned her every few hours, and when she woke crying because she could not feel the blanket across both legs the way she used to. Celeste became the hero in our family's version of the accident, and Talia learned to feel guilty whenever anger toward her appeared. My phone rang while she was measuring a brass strip. Dana Pierce's name filled the screen. I stepped into the kitchen but left the door open. Dana had represented us since the hospital bills and insurance forms began contradicting one another. She handled the injury claim on contingency, so her fee would come from any recovery rather than hourly bills I could not sustain. The PIP carrier confirmed the remaining payment for the initial rehabilitation block, she said. That will not cover the long-term plan, but it closes one issue. And the liability claim? It remains open. The unidentified SUV is still a problem because the account has never been verified. Celeste gave a statement. She did. A statement is not independent support. You have not signed a final release, correct? That is correct. Has Celeste provided the phone records and vehicle data the carrier requested? I thought the company handled that. Her attorney provided selected records, not the complete set. My stomach tightened. My parents think continuing to ask questions will tear the family apart. Dana paused. Questions did not cause the crash, Joanna. I understand that. Then do not sign anything Celeste's insurer sends without calling me. Save every message related to that night, even the ones that seem unimportant. After we hung up, I searched the accident folder on my laptop. Near the bottom was an email sent 3 days after the crash by Sloan Bishop, Celeste's director of content. The subject line read, "Thinking of Talia." Sloan wrote that everyone at the company was praying for us, and that she could provide anything we needed from Celeste's calendar or event records. By the end of December, 3 months after the crash, her company address had stopped working. Celeste said Sloan had left for another opportunity. There had been no farewell announcement, unusual for a company that posted polished tributes whenever an intern finished a summer contract. A text from Celeste, sent from the hospital the night of the crash, sat in the same folder. Please don't let her talk about the phone again. At the time, I had assumed she meant Talia was disoriented and needed rest. Now, I could not remember why I had never asked which phone. Talia rolled into the kitchen. Are you doing the face? What face? The one where you decide something is a problem before you know what it is. I closed the laptop. Dana was updating me about insurance. Is Aunt Celeste in trouble? She is not. The claim is still being reviewed. Talia looked relieved. She stayed with me. She could have left. She did stay, I said. So the gift should be good. It should be yours. Over the next several days, the shape emerged. Talia cut thin brass into a road-like curve, fixed a hand wheel to one side, and suspended a piece of blue glass above 3 narrow metal leaves. When the wheel turned, a small arm brushed the leaves in sequence. The first tones were dull and uneven. Talia adjusted the spacing until 3 soft chimes rang through the room. Her hands tired quickly. The injury had not damaged the nerves in her arms, but months in bed and long hours relearning transfers had taken strength from everywhere. She rested, flexed her fingers, then continued before I could offer help. What does it mean? I asked. Moving without pretending every direction is straight. That sounds like a title, she wrote, turning forward across the top of her sketch. Why 3 chimes? She turned the wheel again. I don't know. That rhythm keeps coming back. Marilyn arrived that afternoon carrying catalog pages from a jewelry store. She admired the sculpture for less than 5 seconds, then spread photographs of crystal bowls across the table. Your aunt will receive gifts from important clients, she said. We could put your name on something more appropriate. Talia kept polishing the brass. I'm making this. Handmade gifts can be misunderstood at formal events. By people who don't understand hands? My mother looked at me. Joanna, please say something. She answered you clearly. Arthur came in behind her and placed pastries on the counter. When I mentioned Dana's call, his mouth tightened. Don't let old questions ruin Celeste's night, he said. The accident has already taken enough. From whom? I asked. He looked away without answering. Celeste came by 2 days later to discuss accessible arrival arrangements. She spoke rapidly about photographers, timing, and approved family remarks. Her phone chimed once inside her handbag. Talia's shoulders lifted. Celeste pulled it out, silenced it immediately, and placed it face down. I realized I had seen her do that before. At the hospital, at my parents' house. Every time Talia entered a room, Celeste's phone went silent. That evening, Talia finished the mechanism. She turned the brass wheel, and the 3 metal leaves sounded cleanly beneath the blue glass. Her face changed. She was looking down, she said. I kept my voice steady. Who was looking down? Talia stared at the wheel until it stopped. I don't know, she whispered. I'm not sure. For 3 days after Talia said someone had been looking down, I waited for her to say more. She did not. I kept every question behind my teeth. I told myself I was respecting her uncertainty, but the truth was less noble. I was afraid that if I asked too directly, she would retreat. I was also afraid that if she answered, the safest version of our family would begin to collapse. At the rehabilitation center, Renee positioned Talia on the edge of a padded table and asked her to reach for a foam block near her left hip. Talia shifted her weight, caught herself with one hand, and moved the block into a basket. Again, Renee said. Talia repeated the movement until her shoulder trembled. I watched the muscles beneath her shirt, as if determination could make them work faster. I had learned the vocabulary of rehabilitation so thoroughly that I could no longer watch my daughter without translating her into measurements. Trunk control, hip activation, weight tolerance, fatigue. Miles adjusted the height of the support frame near the parallel bars. You decide when you're ready to try standing. Talia looked at the straps, then at me. Is she allowed to breathe while I do it? I'm breathing, I said. You're breathing like you're waiting for a bomb technician. Renee hid a smile as she helped secure Talia's knees and hips. Miles stood on the other side, following Renee's instructions. Neither touched Talia without warning her first. When they raised her into the standing frame, Talia's face tightened. Her knees did not lock evenly. Her right leg drifted inward, and most of her weight settled through the support straps instead of her feet. What do you notice? Renee asked. Everything above my waist is filing a complaint. Anything below? Talia closed her eyes. For several seconds, nothing changed. Then she looked down at her left foot. Pressure, she said. Maybe. Where? Under the heel. Or where I think the heel is. Dr. Ortiz had stepped into the gym to observe. She moved closer, but did not celebrate. That is worth documenting, she said. It is not a promise. Sensation can be inconsistent, especially with fatigue. I nodded too quickly. But it means the signal is there. It means Talia reported pressure today. We respect the information without forcing it to predict the future. Talia glanced at me. She had heard the warning beneath the doctor's words even if I pretended not to. Over the next week, she practiced the same sequence. Sitting balance, weight shifting, hip activation, supported standing. Some days her left heel registered pressure, other days it did not. On Tuesday, she could tighten one thigh for less than a second. On Thursday, she could not reproduce it at all. I recorded every attempt in a color-coded spreadsheet until Talia looked over my shoulder. Yellow means inconsistent? She asked. It does. That is a very organized way to say failure. I closed the laptop, but only after saving the file. The first voluntary movement came on a humid Friday afternoon. Renee asked Talia to draw her smallest toe inward. Nothing happened through 5 attempts. Relax everything that doesn't need to help, Renee said. We're looking for intention, not strength. On the 6th try, the toe pulled inward by the width of a pencil line. After a rest, Talia repeated it twice. I lifted my phone. Can I film? She nodded, exhausted. I captured 4 seconds and sent the clip to our family group before Renee had lowered the table. First voluntary toe movement, I wrote. She did it on command. Arthur responded with 3 heart emojis. Marilyn called less than a minute later. Joanna, please be careful, she said. You cannot build that child's hopes around one twitch. It happened 3 times. A muscle spasm can happen more than once. Renee confirmed it was voluntary. You hear what you want to hear because you cannot accept reality. I looked across the gym. Talia was watching me. This is her reality, I said. Not yours. Celeste did not respond at all. The next morning, I ordered resistance bands and a compact pedal device for home use. I cleared space beside Talia's drafting table and printed a schedule based on exercises I had watched Renee demonstrate. Talia rolled into the room and studied the equipment. What is this? A home program. Nothing extreme. 10 minutes before breakfast and 10 after dinner. Did Renee give you this? She showed us most of it. That wasn't my question. I straightened the resistance bands. We finally have a sign that your body is responding. We should use the momentum. My body is not a marketing launch. I am trying to help. You're trying to make yesterday happen again. The sentence stopped me, but not long enough. We cannot waste a window for recovery because you are frustrated. Her expression changed. I'm not wasting anything. I didn't mean it that way. You always mean it that way after something good happens. She rolled backward, turned in the doorway, and left me beside the equipment I had bought without asking her. At the next session, Miles worked with Talia on transferring her weight between the armrests of her chair. She completed the movement twice, then refused a 3rd attempt. I expected him to encourage her. Instead, he sat on a low bench and adjusted the cuff of his pants. A slim forearm crutch rested against the wall behind him. Talia looked at it. You don't always use that. No. Why today? My leg is not cooperating. You work here. That does not make my nervous system more professional. She studied him. Does it bother you when people notice? My family used to watch my body like a weather forecast. If I walked well, everyone relaxed. If I needed the crutch, they looked disappointed before they hit it. What did you want them to do? Talia asked. Ask whether I needed help, then believe the answer. He did not look at me. He did not need to. Renee joined them and explained that the home exercises needed to be reviewed before we added anything. She did not reprimand me, but her calmness made my mistake feel precise. We can build frequency, she said, but Talia has to participate in that decision. More work is not always better work. I folded the printed schedule and placed it in my bag. The session continued with supported weight bearing. Talia was halfway into the frame when Renee's phone chimed from the counter. 3 soft notes. Talia froze. Her fingers locked around the handles. The muscles in her arms went rigid, and her breath caught high in her chest. Renee silenced the phone immediately. Talia stared at the blue light fading from the screen. Don't tell Mom I'm still, she whispered. The sentence stopped. No one filled it in. Miles lowered himself into her line of sight. You are here in the gym. Renee's phone made 3 sounds. You do not have to explain anything else. Talia shook her head as if she were trying to clear water from her ears. I don't know what I said. That's okay, he replied. We're not going to guess. He looked at Renee, then at me. A trauma specialist might help her separate what she knows from what her body is reacting to. My first thought was the standing frame. How much therapy are we talking about? I asked. She already has 3 appointments most weeks. If we add another, something physical may have to move. Talia's eyes dropped. Renee answered carefully. A body that does not feel safe will have difficulty participating in physical work. That does not mean psychology repairs a spinal cord injury. It means fear, sleep, trust, and attention affect how someone enters a session. I don't want her progress interrupted. Miles glanced toward the frame. This is already interrupting it. I hated that he was right. We ended the session with one final supported stand. Talia asked to try despite the shaking in her hands. Renee and Miles secured the frame, checked her knees, and raised her slowly. For 12 seconds, Talia remained upright. Her left knee held better than before. The right buckled inward, then corrected against the support. Her whole body trembled, and by the time Renee lowered her, sweat lined her hair. You did it, I said. 12 seconds. I hugged her before asking permission and rushed through the toe movement, the heel pressure, and everything I wanted those seconds to predict. Talia pushed gently against my shoulder. It was 12 seconds, Mom. It wasn't my whole life coming back. The gym went quiet. I stepped away. That evening, I removed the printed schedule from the refrigerator. I asked whether she would meet Dr. Valerie Shaw, the trauma psychologist Renee recommended. Talia considered it for a long time. I'll go, she said. But you don't get to ask what I remembered after every appointment. The condition hurt because it named exactly what I would have done. I nodded. Agreed. She held my gaze until she believed me. For the first time since the accident, helping my daughter meant accepting a door I was not allowed to follow her through. Dr. Valerie Shaw's office did not look like a place where anyone was expected to perform. There were no motivational posters, no charts of the nervous system, and no clock placed where Talia could watch the minutes disappear. A low shelf held smooth stones, colored pencils, and a small wooden box with a lid that slid instead of snapped. During the first appointment, Dr. Shaw invited me in for 10 minutes so we could agree on boundaries. She explained that she would not ask Talia to reconstruct the crash, fill gaps, or choose between competing versions of events. Their work would separate 3 things: what Talia knew had happened, what her body reacted to in the present, and what remained unknown. Talia decides what leaves this room, she said. If I believe there is an immediate safety concern, I will tell both of you. Otherwise, I will share only what she authorizes. Talia looked at me. And Mom doesn't get a summary in the parking lot. I understand, I said. She kept looking until I added, "I will not ask." Keeping that promise was harder than making it. After each session, I drove home with questions pressing against the back of my teeth. Talia would stare through the passenger window or talk about Avery's plan to repaint the art room stools. I answered whatever subject she chose and never asked whether she had remembered the person looking down. A week later, Talia allowed Dr. Shaw to invite me in for the last few minutes. On a sheet of paper, Dr. Shaw had drawn 3 columns. In the first, Talia had written things she felt certain about. The seat belt had pulled hard across her chest. The road had been wet. Celeste's perfume had smelled stronger inside the warm car. There had been blue light reflected in the windshield. In the second column were present-day reactions. 3 soft chimes made her hands lock. Blue light in a dark car made her turn away. Watching someone lower their eyes toward a phone made her chest tighten before she understood why. The final column was headed, "Not finished." Beneath it, Talia had written, "Don't tell your mom I'm still." Nothing followed. "I don't know the last word," she said. "Sometimes I think I do, but then I hear everyone telling me I was drugged and confused." Dr. Shaw did not correct her or offer a possibility. Then the honest version is that the sentence ends there for now. Questions crowded in, whether Celeste had said it, whether the car was moving, and what my sister had wanted hidden. I folded my hands in my lap and asked none of them. Talia noticed the effort. "You can breathe." "I am breathing." Not in a convincing way. For the first time in days, she smiled. The gala was 2 weeks away when an event coordinator named Janelle emailed asking for a 10-second video of turning forward. She needed its dimensions, weight, and handling instructions so the stage crew could prepare a secure display table. Talia placed the sculpture on her accessible work surface and recorded the clip herself. She showed the brass wheel, the curved metal road, the blue glass, and the 3 suspended leaves. At the end, she turned the handle once so the chime sounded. She sent it to the group address Janelle provided. Celeste and Marilyn were copied. Celeste replied, "In less than 4 minutes. The piece is thoughtful, but the sound elements will interfere with the program audio. Please remove the 3 metal leaves. The blue glass also clashes with the stage palette. Clear crystal would photograph better." Talia read the message twice. "It's 10 inches tall. Is it going to overpower her ballroom?" She may be thinking about the cameras. She is always thinking about the cameras. Before I could answer, Marilyn called me privately. "Please have her change it," she said. "The chimes are childish, and the blue glass looks harsh." "You watched the preview?" Celeste forwarded it. She already wrote the same thing. "Then you know this is not only my opinion." Their coordination was too fast and too exact. I asked why 3 quiet notes mattered so much. "They do not matter," Marilyn said. "That is the point. There is no reason to make a formal evening revolve around a child's odd fixation. It is her artwork. It is Celeste's event." I looked toward the studio. Talia was tightening the same screw she had already checked twice. "Those are not the same thing," I said. That afternoon, Celeste called with another concern. The main photography platform, she explained, was narrow. She suggested Talia remain beside the first row while the rest of us stood behind her for the family photograph. "So her wheelchair will not be in the picture," I said. "So no one gets hurt trying to maneuver around equipment." "Talia can maneuver her own chair." Celeste's voice cooled. "Joanna, not every accommodation is an insult." "Then widen the frame. There are sponsors, lighting marks, and a fixed schedule. You run an event company. Solve it." She ended the call without saying goodbye. Arthur came by that evening with a small toolkit for Talia, though he had not asked what she needed. He found me at the kitchen counter reading Celeste's email again. "You are turning every detail into evidence," he said. "I am noticing that your wife and Celeste both panicked over the same 3 notes." "No one panicked." "Then why demand that Talia remove them?" He looked toward the closed studio door. "Some memories are safer unfinished." The sentence settled between us. For whom? I asked. Arthur's face tightened. For people who still have to live with what happened. Talia lives with it every day. He picked up his keys. Do not make the gala a courtroom. I did not stop him when he left. At rehabilitation the next morning, Talia worked at an accessible bench instead of the standing frame. Renee had approved a session focused on trunk control, reach, and sustained use of the adaptive rotary tool. Miles guarded her posture while she shaped a tiny brass collar that would keep the wheel from slipping. Your aunt still wants the chimes removed? He asked. Talia nodded. She thinks sound has a dress code. Miles did not laugh as quickly as I expected. Do you want to change them? No. Then, do you still want to go? She kept the tool against the metal until the edge was smooth. Yes. You are allowed to change your mind at the door, in the hallway, or halfway through the speech. I know. Knowing and believing are different. Talia switched off the tool. If I stop going into every room where someone might be uncomfortable, I will end up with no rooms. Miles nodded once. Then make sure the decision is yours. Not a challenge you think you have to win. She fitted the brass collar into place. The wheel turned cleanly, without wobbling. No one had moved her hands. No one had counted repetitions. She tested it twice, then stopped because she was satisfied, not because a timer told her to. At home, she packed turning forward herself. She lined a shallow box with foam, cut a channel for the wheel, and tied 2 cloth handles so it could rest securely across her lap. She refused my offer to carry it at the gala. If it is my gift, I bring it in. I watched her wheel the packed sculpture through the hall without touching either wall. She looked stronger than she had a month earlier, but strength no longer felt like a straight line toward walking. It looked like deciding what belonged on her lap, what entered a room with her, and who was allowed to alter it. That night, I found her beside the north window, the invitation propped against the finished box. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Mom, she said, if I never walk, will you still know what to hope for? The answer should have come immediately. I loved her. I knew that. I knew her life was larger than her legs, larger than any frame, brace, or set of parallel bars. But in the silence before I spoke, I saw every spreadsheet, every video I had replayed, every change in my face when her body failed to repeat yesterday's success. I had waited too long. Talia turned toward the dark window before I could tell her yes. I answered Talia's question before we left for the gala, but the answer came too late to erase the silence that had preceded it. I will always know what to hope for, I told her. I just need to learn that hope does not have to look like walking. She nodded without turning from the window. She did not tell me whether she believed me. On Saturday evening, August 15, the glass-walled venue rose beside the Willamette River, already filled with nearly 200 guests. The sign marked accessible arrival was half hidden behind a decorative hedge. The legal level route led around the building and through a service corridor, away from the photographs beneath the main canopy. Nothing says honored guest like entering beside the industrial dishwasher, Talia said. She used the rotating seat to transfer while I lowered her folded chair from the rear lift. Then she settled turning forward across her lap by its cloth handles. Janelle met us near the kitchen. The florist moved the sign. I'm fixing it now. Does the florist need the ramp? Talia asked. Janelle did not pretend to misunderstand. No. She led us into the foyer, where lilies, polished wood, and a wall of photographs celebrated Celeste's 10 years in business. In almost every image, my sister stood at the center. Celeste noticed us only when a photographer turned our way. Her face softened at once, and she leaned beside Talia's chair. There is my brave girl, she said for the camera, resting a hand on the chair back without asking. How are the legs doing? They are still attached, Talia said. The photographer hid a smile. When he moved on, Celeste removed her hand and her warmth with it. You brought the original piece, she said, looking at the box. That is usually how gifts work, Talia replied. I thought your mother might persuade you to make the adjustments. It is finished. Celeste's eyes moved to me. Tonight is important. It is important to Talia, too. Marilyn arrived with Arthur and announced the family photograph. She placed Talia at the front edge because, she said, it would be easier to crop the image for different formats. She will be in the family photograph, I said. She will be visible. That was not what I said. Arthur touched my elbow. Do not start the evening looking for a fight. The photographer moved 2 chairs, widened the group, and placed Talia beside me. Celeste smiled until the final flash, then left to greet a sponsor. Talia's phone vibrated. She opened a message from Avery. You made it. Do not let fancy lighting intimidate turning forward. It has better reviews from me. Talia smiled at the screen. Avery had not asked whether the venue was accessible, whether Talia felt brave, or whether Celeste approved of the gift. She had simply treated the sculpture as art worth showing. You want to answer? I asked. Later. She will demand photographic proof. Guests recognized Talia from Celeste's posts and called her inspiring. One woman squeezed her shoulder without asking and said she had prayed for the day Talia would rise from the chair. Apparently prayer has a deadline, Talia said after she left. Do you want to go? Not yet. Celeste's program began after dinner. A video celebrated her company's growth from a rented office to a firm handling corporate launches, charity galas, and luxury weddings throughout Oregon. Near the end, photographs of Talia appeared on the screens. There was Talia in the hospital with Celeste, sitting beside her bed. Talia at an adaptive sports event Celeste had attended for 20 minutes. Talia smiling beside a banner that read, "Strength is a choice." My daughter stared at the images. Celeste stood at the podium and told the room that the accident had taught her what truly mattered. When someone you love is hurt, she said, you stay. You do not look away. Applause moved through the ballroom. I felt Talia's hand close around mine. Janelle approached and quietly reviewed the next segment. Celeste had planned it as a short tribute. Talia would wheel onto the platform, say the approved sentence, hand over the gift, and remain beside Celeste for photographs. You only have to say the line if you still want to, I whispered. Talia looked toward the screens, where Celeste's logo had replaced her hospital photographs. I want to give her the gift. That is not the same as doing her script. I know. A portable ramp led to the platform. Talia placed the box across her lap and propelled herself upward without assistance. I followed several feet behind, close enough to help only if she asked. Celeste welcomed her with an open arm and a smile designed for the cameras. This young woman has taught our entire family what courage looks like, she said. Janelle handed Talia the microphone. The approved words were simple. Thank you for staying with me after the crash. Talia looked at Celeste, then at the 200 faces waiting for the emotional moment they had been promised. Thank you for staying with me after the crash, she said. Applause began before she finished. Talia placed the microphone against her lap and lifted the box. Celeste had no graceful way to refuse it in front of the cameras. She opened the lid. Turning forward rested inside, the curved brass rod circling the blue glass. Talia explained that the wheel represented movement that did not have to follow a straight line. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke about making something that could continue changing without pretending it had returned to its original shape. For a moment, Celeste's public smile held. Then she saw the 3 metal leaves. Her fingers paused above the wheel. Turn it, Talia said. Celeste glanced toward Marilyn. My mother's face had gone still. The cameras were recording. Guests were waiting. Celeste wrapped her hand around the brass handle and turned it. 3 soft chimes rang through the ballroom. The blue glass caught the light from the screen and reflected across Celeste's face. Her smile vanished. The fear came first. I saw it in the sudden widening of her eyes, in the way her grip crushed the edge of the box, and in the silence that followed long after the last note faded. Celeste leaned toward Talia. What do you remember? She whispered. Talia looked at her hand on the wheel. That sound was in the car, she said into the microphone resting near her lap. You were looking down. A murmur moved through the room. Celeste tore the sculpture from the box. One brass edge caught against the foam and bent. She looked toward the nearest camera, then toward the guests whose attention had shifted from Talia to her. Her fear hardened into contempt. She carried turning forward to the black service receptacle at the far edge of the platform and dropped it inside. Cheap things belong with cheap people, she said. The room did not react as one body. A few guests gave uncertain laughs, assuming they had missed a joke. Most remained silent. A server near the ramp took one step forward and stopped. Several people lowered their eyes. Talia stared into the bin. Marilyn moved beside Celeste. Your child needs to learn her place. Arthur reached for my arm. Joanna, do not create a scene in front of everyone. I stepped away from him and walked to the bin. The blue glass had not shattered, but the brass rod was bent inward. I lifted the sculpture carefully and placed it back in its box. I did not take the microphone. I did not explain the accident or demand that the guests choose sides. Celeste had already shown them who she was when fear took control of her. I knelt beside Talia. Do you want to leave? Her face had gone pale. She nodded. I stood and looked at my sister and parents. Tomorrow, you'll learn yours. Talia wheeled down the ramp under her own power. I carried the damaged sculpture behind her. Inside the Cayenne, she used the rotating seat to transfer, while I secured her wheelchair with the lift system. Neither of us spoke until we had crossed the river. Then Talia looked at me. Was she scared of me? I kept both hands on the wheel. She was scared of what you might remember. The following morning, Celeste arrived at my house with Marilyn and Arthur. They stood in my kitchen, insisting Talia tell the guests she had been confused by the lights and noise. My phone rang before I answered them. Dana Pierce's name appeared on the screen. I placed the call on speaker. Before anyone deletes another file, Dana said, you need to listen carefully. Across the kitchen, all 3 members of my family went white. Dana's voice filled my kitchen while Celeste, Marilyn, and Arthur stood across from me in clothes that still looked chosen for public appearances. Talia was in the hallway behind the half-closed studio door. I could not see her, but I knew she was listening. Dana, what exactly have you done? Celeste asked. I sent preservation demands this morning, Dana replied. Talia provided new information in front of witnesses last night, and your reaction raised reasonable questions about evidence related to an open bodily injury claim. Celeste folded her arms. A frightened child said something vague after hearing a sound. That is not evidence. I did not call it evidence. I called it new information that makes destruction of potentially relevant material unacceptable. Dana had sent the demands to Celeste, her company attorney, the insurer, the Volvo's leasing company, and the media provider. Arthur gripped a chair. Does that mean you can take her phone? No, Dana said. The letters require preservation. They do not let me open a device or collect private accounts. If the parties refuse to cooperate, I will seek the records through a civil action and lawful discovery. Marilyn looked at me as though I had already summoned police to the house. You are doing this because Celeste lost her temper at a party. I am doing it because she asked my daughter what she remembered before she threw her work into a trash can. That proves nothing. It proves she was afraid of the question. Celeste's face tightened. If a draft was deleted months ago, the cloud would not still keep it, would it? The kitchen went silent. Dana answered carefully. I did not say anything about a draft. Celeste glanced at Marilyn. It lasted less than a second, but it was long enough. I was speaking generally, she said. My company deletes unfinished material all the time. Then your attorneys can identify the retention system and respond through the proper channel, Dana replied. Marilyn stepped toward my phone. This is exactly what I feared. You are taking a traumatized child's confused memory and turning it into a weapon against your sister. Behind the studio door, something scraped lightly across the floor. I lowered my voice. Talia, is not a weapon. You are letting that lawyer build a case out of every sound she hears and every nightmare she has." Dana interrupted before I could answer. "Mrs. Barlow, Talia's memory is a lead. It is not the deciding proof, and no responsible investigator should treat it as one. Any conclusion must come from records that can be independently verified." Arthur looked relieved. "Then let us handle this privately. Celeste can apologize for the gala." The insurance matter became a formal claim when the accident and medical bills were reported, Dana said. "Keeping Joanna uninformed does not make it private. Official records destroy people," Arthur said too quickly. "Even when no one intended harm." I thought of his warning that some memories were safer unfinished. Dana asked me to call her after my family left. She reminded everyone that no device, account, message, draft, or company record related to the accident should be altered. Then she ended the call. Celeste stared at the phone, as if it had become a live wire. "You have no idea what you are doing," she said. "I know exactly what I am doing. I am refusing to make Talia correct your fear for you. She embarrassed me in front of my clients. You put her hospital photographs on a screen, gave her a scripted thank you, and called her brave until she said something you could not control." Marilyn stepped between us. "Celeste stayed with that child after the crash. And you have used one decent act after the impact to silence every question about what happened before it." Arthur asked me to lower my voice. The studio door opened. Talia sat in her wheelchair with both hands on the rims. She looked tired rather than angry, which frightened me more. "Can everybody stop talking about my memory like it belongs to the insurance company?" Marilyn turned toward her with instant softness. "Sweetheart, we are trying to protect you." "No, you're arguing about whether I'm useful." "That is not what anyone said." Dana called my memory a lead. Aunt Celeste called it confusion. Grandma called it a weapon. Which one am I supposed to be today? I crossed the kitchen, but Talia rolled backward when I approached. "Please leave," she told them. Marilyn looked at me. "You are allowing a child to remove her family from this house. It is her house, too." Celeste picked up her bag. "When this destroys everything, remember that I tried to stop it." Talia watched her walk out without answering. Arthur followed, but Marilyn remained near the door. "You cannot save Talia by destroying Celeste," she said. "You already chose who was allowed to pay," I replied. After the door closed, I locked it. Talia returned to the studio. Turning Forward lay on the drafting table, its brass rode bent where Celeste had pulled it from the box. The blue glass remained intact, but one metal leaf had twisted away from the others. I wanted to begin repairing it immediately. Instead, I opened the rehabilitation calendar on my phone. "You have Renee tomorrow," I said. "We can keep the session light. It might help to stay in routine." Talia did not look at me. "I'm not going. You do not have to use the standing frame. You could work on transfers or seated balance." I said I'm not going. One missed session can become two, and after a week your tolerance may drop. You worked too hard to lose momentum because of them. I reached toward her knee, intending only to adjust the footplate that had shifted. Talia slapped my hand away. "Do not touch my legs." I froze. She had never spoken to me that way before, but the fear in her face told me this was not rebellion. It was a boundary I had crossed so often that she finally had to defend it with force. "I'm sorry," I said. "You watch me when I move. They watch me when I remember something useful. What happens when I'm just here?" The question stripped away every explanation I had prepared. I sat on the low stool beside the drafting table, keeping enough distance that she would not feel surrounded. "I have been telling myself that I was fighting for your future," I said. I counted seconds, contractions, appointments, and every movement, because numbers made me feel less helpless. Then I started needing those numbers to prove I was doing enough. Talia stared at the damaged sculpture. "I made every good day into evidence that I was a good mother," I continued. "And every hard day felt like proof that I had failed. I put that fear on your body. I made you carry it. Her lower lip tightened, but she did not speak. "You never have to walk to give me my life back." She looked at me then. "I don't know if that's true. It should have been true every time I walked into therapy with you. I am sorry it did not feel true. What happens when I don't want to try? I ask what you need. I do not turn your answer into a medical emergency. And if I never go back?" The old fear rose so quickly that I felt it in my throat. I imagined lost strength, narrowing possibilities, and every professional warning about consistency. I let the fear exist without handing it to her. "Then we build your life around the choices you have, not the result I wanted." She looked away first. I called Renee, while Talia listened, and said we were pausing physical therapy until Talia chose to return. Renee did not argue. "A week away would not erase months of work," she said, though Talia might need time to regain confidence and tolerance when she came back. Dr. Ortiz agreed that rest was not neurological collapse. For the next week, she did not attend rehabilitation. She slept later, ignored the standing frame brochure on her desk, and refused to discuss whether she would return. I stopped opening my spreadsheet. Turning forward remained on the drafting table until Talia asked me to bring my fine pliers and a small block of polished wood. She examined the bent brass, then pointed to the damaged section. "Hold it here. Do not straighten it until I tell you." I followed her instructions. She guided the angle, checked the wheel, and told me when to stop. We repaired the mechanism without erasing the dent Celeste had left. The sculpture turned again, though the road no longer formed the smooth curve Talia had designed. The 3 metal leaves were still misaligned. "Should I fix those?" I asked. "Not today." I set down the pliers. Talia rested her hand on the wheel, but did not turn it. "I don't know if I believe you yet," she said. "You don't have to believe me today." The week after we repaired the bent brass road, Dana said the insurer had demanded records Celeste should have provided months earlier. Because the company leased the Volvo and the injury claim remained open, the policy required cooperation. Celeste's attorney sent call history, selected texts, and a report showing no conventional call at impact. The package omitted media workspace logs, draft history, and a complete account of what the connected phone had been doing. They answered the narrowest question they could invent, Dana said. Talia sat across from me at the studio table, adjusting one of the metal leaves on turning forward. She had permitted me to tell her only what had been confirmed, not what Dana or I suspected. "Did they find proof she was recording?" she asked. "Not yet." "Then don't tell me she was." "I won't." She studied my face as though checking for the part of the answer I wanted her to infer. For nearly a year, adults had treated uncertainty as permission to replace her memory with theirs. I would not repeat that mistake, simply because I believed my version was closer to the truth. When Celeste refused to provide the missing records voluntarily, Dana filed a civil negligence action before the legal deadline and sought limited early discovery for data at risk of being lost. The filing proved nothing by itself. It created a lawful route for consent requests, subpoenas, and court orders, instead of private access or guesswork. The first useful answer came from Sloane Bishop. Dana found her through the contact information attached to the email she had sent after the accident. Sloane now worked for a museum foundation in Seattle. She agreed to speak only after Dana clarified that she was not being accused of wrongdoing. I joined their video call from my office. Sloane appeared in a plain room with white shelves behind her. She looked younger than I remembered, and far more tired. "I wondered when someone would ask about the workspace," she said. Dana did not ask whether Sloane had kept a secret copy. She asked how Celeste's company handled sponsor previews. Sloane explained that sponsor previews passed through a cloud workspace that automatically created a low-quality proxy with a timestamp, account identifier, and verification code. Deleting the visible folder did not necessarily erase the provider's system copy. "Did you save anything personally?" Dana asked. "No. That would have violated my agreement. I only know where the system may have kept it." "Why did you leave?" Sloane hesitated. 3 days after the crash, Celeste asked me to confirm there had been no sponsor content created that evening. I told her I could not confirm something without checking the logs. Her mother had already accessed the workspace and removed the temporary folder. Celeste said the accident had changed everyone, and that loyalty mattered more than procedure. What did you do? I refused to sign the statement she drafted. 6 weeks later, she removed me from client work. By the 3rd month after the crash, my position was eliminated. I remembered Celeste describing Sloane's departure as an exciting new opportunity. Even then, she had turned removal into a prettier story. Sloane gave Dana the provider's name, the workspace structure, and the terminology needed to request the right records. She did not tell us what the proxy contained because she had never seen the final system copy. That distinction mattered to Talia. "Sloane knows where something might be," she said after I explained the call. "She doesn't know what it proves." That is correct. And Grandma deleting a folder doesn't prove what was inside. Also correct. Talia nodded. "Tell me when they know, not while everyone is guessing." The lawful request to the provider took weeks. During that time, Talia remained away from physical rehabilitation. She met with Dr. Shaw, worked in the studio, and began preparing to return to school art class. The morning of her first class, Talia told me Avery's mother was driving. "Her car has room for the chair," she said before I could ask. "You can speak to her. You cannot come into the classroom." "I am going to art class, Mom. Not crossing the Arctic alone." Avery arrived complaining that someone had used the good metal cutters on cardboard. She asked before helping lift the folded chair into the car. I stayed on the porch and, for the next 2 hours, did not call the school or drive past the building. Talia returned with silver paint on her sleeve and copper wire around one wrist. "How was it?" Mrs. Alvarez moved one table, not the whole room. No one made a speech. Miles had sent one message. "No score. Just your day." "It was a good day," Talia said. The media provider released its response near the end of September. Dana asked me to come to her office, but I refused to hear anything until we had agreed on what Talia would be told. Dr. Shaw joined us by video. Talia chose to sit beside me, though she kept enough space between our chairs that our arms did not touch. Dana began with what had been authenticated. The system logs showed that Celeste's company account had opened a private sponsor preview shortly before the crash. The session began while Celeste's phone was connected to the Volvo's infotainment system. A user later deleted the visible draft, but the provider retained a 13-second proxy tied to the account by its timestamp and verification hash. "This does not show the collision," Dana said. "It is not a complete video of the crash." Talia's hands tightened in her lap. "What does it have?" Dana looked at Dr. Shaw, then back at Talia. "Audio. You decide whether to hear it." Talia asked for the words first. Dana read from the verified transcript. 3 notification tones sounded near the beginning. Then Talia's voice said, "Aunt Celeste, watch the road." Celeste answered, "Don't tell your mom I'm still filming." For months, the final word had stopped behind a locked door in Talia's mind. Now it existed outside her. She did not cry. She looked down at her hands as if waiting for them to become someone else's. "I remembered it," she said. "Yes," Dr. Shaw replied. "That sentence matches the recording. My body remembered it before I did. It reacted to something real. That does not mean every feeling is a complete record, but this part has now been independently verified." Talia turned to me. "They kept telling me I was confused. I wanted to say I had always believed her, but that would have been another pretty version. I had believed the possibility of her memory. I had also allowed my family's certainty to occupy the space where her uncertainty should have been protected. I should have defended your right not to know yet," I said. "Instead, I let them fill in the blank for you," Dana continued, only after Talia asked her to. The Volvo's infotainment log confirmed that Celeste's phone was connected during the relevant period. The event data recorder supplied speed and braking timing. Lane safety and telematics records, read beside roadway photographs and vehicle damage, showed a gradual drift followed by late braking and a sharp correction. The reconstruction specialist could not prove that no black SUV had existed anywhere nearby. He could say the combined records did not show the braking or steering pattern expected from a sudden evasive maneuver, and there was no evidence of contact with a second car. "Does that mean you proved the SUV was a lie?" Talia asked. "Not by itself," Dana said. "It means the SUV story is not supported by the vehicle data, and it becomes much less credible when placed beside the recording and the media logs." The administrative history contained another entry. The morning after the crash, someone at Celeste's office created a temporary user profile in Marilyn's name. That profile entered the media workspace and deleted the sponsor folder. My mother later admitted Celeste had created the access and asked her to remove the folder. Marilyn still claimed she believed she was protecting a traumatized daughter from a meaningless work file. Arthur's part was quieter. An adjuster's follow-up letter sent to Celeste's attorney summarized the investigator's preliminary concern that no objective evidence supported a second vehicle. Celeste showed Arthur a copy. He kept what he knew from me, and later admitted he feared I would turn uncertainty into blame. All three had decided what I was allowed to know. More importantly, they had decided what Talia was allowed to trust. When the meeting ended, Dana walked us to the elevator. "We proved the phone was not put away, and we have a strong basis to challenge the SUV account," she said. "That is significant. It is not the same as having won every legal question." Talia pressed the elevator button herself. "I don't need you to tell me we won," she said. "I needed to know I wasn't making it up." The doors opened. For the first time since the crash, she entered the elevator without looking at me to confirm which version of her own memory she was permitted to carry. The insurer scheduled Celeste's examination under oath in a conference room on the 9th floor of its downtown office. Because our civil claim was already pending, Marilyn and Arthur agreed to give separate recorded sworn statements in the same room later that day. It was not a courtroom, but a court reporter would preserve every answer. By written agreement, Dana could attend, submit authenticated exhibits, and raise objections while the insurer's lawyer conducted the questioning. Talia was not required to attend or testify that day. Her earlier account had already been preserved separately, and Dr. Shaw had made clear that no one would question her through a live reaction. The parties allowed her to watch selected portions from a private room down the hall. She could mute the feed, leave, or stop at any time. Before we separated, I asked whether she wanted me to stay with her. "No," she said. "I need to hear what they say when they think I'm not in the room." I nodded and followed Dana inside. Celeste's original statement was the first exhibit. She had said her phone was stored in her handbag before she entered the wet curve and that a black SUV moved into her lane, forcing the Volvo toward the barrier. The insurer's lawyer placed the authenticated media log beside it. Celeste's company account had opened a private sponsor preview less than 2 minutes before the crash. The 13-second proxy contained Talia warning her to watch the road, and Celeste telling her not to tell me she was still filming. "My phone could have started the preview automatically," Celeste said. "Could the system record and upload that preview without a user opening the workspace and activating the session?" Celeste's attorney objected to the wording, then allowed her to answer. "I don't know every technical detail. You had used the platform for years. My staff handled most uploads. Sloan Bishop said you personally controlled private sponsor previews." Sloan was a disgruntled employee. The lawyer pointed to the provider's verification. "The account activity does not depend on Miss Bishop's opinion." Celeste looked at me. "Sponsors expected immediate updates. I may have checked whether something had uploaded." While driving? I was not watching a video. The next exhibit combined the event data recorder's speed and braking information with lane safety records, telematics, roadway photographs, and vehicle damage. The reconstruction specialist explained that no device could show precisely where Celeste's eyes had been each second. Nor could he prove that no black SUV had existed anywhere nearby. What the records showed was gradual drift, late braking, and a sharp correction after the Volvo had already begun leaving its path. That pattern did not support the sudden, evasive maneuver in Celeste's statement. Celeste stared at the report. "I only looked down for," she began. Her attorney shifted beside her. Celeste lifted her head. "I was checking the road." The insurer's lawyer waited. "You looked down to check the road?" "I checked the navigation display. I needed to see the curve." "Your prior statement said the phone was in your handbag and that you knew the road." Celeste's breathing changed. "It was 1 second," she said. "Maybe less." The room remained still long enough for her to hear what she had admitted. "1 second does not mean I caused the accident," she added. The specialist said the exact duration was not the only issue. The active media session, the audio, the connected phone, the vehicle movement, the late braking, and the false claim that the phone had been put away all supported distraction as the most reasonable explanation. When the sworn questioning paused, the insurer's lawyer asked whether I wanted to clarify one point for the claim record. "You did the right thing after the impact," I told Celeste. "You called 911 and kept Talia awake." Her eyes filled. "I saved her life. You helped her after the crash. That does not erase the choice you made before it. I never wanted her hurt. You kept filming while she asked you to watch the road." Celeste lowered her eyes. Her examination ended without an apology. Marilyn entered after a short recess. The administrative log showed that a temporary profile had been created in her name from a computer in Celeste's office the morning after the crash. That profile entered the media workspace and deleted the sponsor folder. "Did Celeste create that access for you?" the insurer's lawyer asked. "Yes." "Did she ask you to delete the folder?" "Yes." "Did she tell you what it contained?" "She said it was an unfinished work file, recorded during the drive." "Did you listen to it?" "No." "Then why delete it?" "To protect my family." "Which member?" Marilyn's mouth tightened. Celeste was barely functioning from guilt. Talia was in surgery. Joanna could hardly stand. I believed removing one file would prevent more pain. "You did not know the file was meaningless." I knew Celeste had made a mistake. I did not know 1 second would destroy a child's life. The lawyer allowed me a brief response after her examination. 1 second did not make you create an account and delete a folder, I said. You chose that afterward. I was trying to keep us together. You kept Celeste's story together. The rest of us had to live inside it. Arthur's statement was quieter. The insurer showed him the adjuster's follow-up letter that Celeste's attorney had received after the preliminary site review. It said there was no objective evidence supporting a second vehicle and requested additional proof. "Celeste showed you this letter?" the lawyer asked. "Yes." "Did you tell Joanna or her attorney?" "No." "Why not?" "I thought the investigator might be wrong." "Then why keep the concern from them?" Arthur pressed his palms together. "Joanna was already losing everything. I thought if blame entered the family there would be no way back." He had feared the family breaking apart, so he had allowed Talia to doubt herself alone. The court reporter marked the final exhibit, and the insurer's lawyer ended the last sworn statement. Under the parties' prior agreement, everyone remained for a brief recorded claim conference about contact boundaries and next steps. No one was under oath during that portion, and Talia was free to enter or stay away. A few minutes later, Dr. Shaw opened the door. Talia rolled in beside her. Celeste rose halfway, then sat when Talia raised one hand. "I only want to say something," Talia said. Her voice shook, and she paused before continuing. "You kept telling me I remembered it wrong, because that was easier for you." Marilyn began to cry. "Sweetheart, we thought you were protecting yourself from something frightening." "No. You were protecting Aunt Celeste from me." Arthur looked down. Celeste's hands moved forward, then stopped on the table. "I never meant for this to happen." Talia looked at her. "But you meant to make me doubt it." Celeste had no answer. Talia turned toward Dana. "I don't want any of them contacting me directly." Dana clarified that this meant calls, messages, visits, and contact through other relatives. Talia said yes. "You cannot cut off your grandparents over one terrible decision," Marilyn said. It wasn't one decision. You kept choosing it. Talia turned her chair and left with Dr. Shaw. The insurer would reassess liability, and our civil case would continue. Any state agency reviewing the false report or deletion of records would make its own decision. No one was arrested that day, and no judge declared that justice was complete. The gala video had already circulated among event planners because dozens of guests had recorded Celeste throwing Turning Forward away. Several clients paused contracts. Her business partners required her to step back from direct operations while they reviewed the company's exposure. The firm did not collapse in an afternoon, and Celeste did not lose everything at once. Dana warned me that any settlement for Talia's future care would still require medical projections, insurance analysis, negotiation, and court review because she was a minor. Money could support therapy, equipment, transportation, and accessibility. It could not return the year she had spent apologizing for a memory other people needed her to forget. I found Talia near the elevators with Dr. Shaw, looking through the glass wall at the river. Ready to go home? I asked. She nodded, then looked at me. I want to go back next week, but you wait outside. There was a time when I would have asked what exercise she wanted to try, or whether 1 week was too soon. Okay, I said. The following Tuesday, I drove Talia back to the rehabilitation center and waited outside. I parked beside the same entrance I had used for nearly a year, lowered her wheelchair with the lift, and followed her as far as the reception desk. Renee met us there with a tablet under one arm. Miles stood several feet behind her, holding the door to the therapy wing open without waving Talia forward. I'll be in the hallway, I said. Talia adjusted one foot on the plate. Not by the glass. The gym doors had narrow windows. I had watched through them before when she asked for privacy, convincing myself that technically, staying outside was the same as letting go. I won't look in. She nodded and rolled through the doorway. I sat beneath a framed photograph of Mount Hood, while weights shifted, wheels moved, and voices rose faintly on the other side of the wall. Every sound tempted me to create a picture. A metal bar clinked, and I imagined her knee buckling. Someone laughed, and I wondered whether it was Talia. When a timer sounded, my hand moved toward the notebook in my bag before I remembered there was nothing I had been asked to record. 40 minutes later, Renee opened the door. Talia wants 10 more minutes, she said. Is she all right? She is working. The old version of me would have asked what that meant. Instead, I remained in the chair. When Talia came out, sweat darkened the hair near her temples. She looked tired but not defeated. What did you do? I asked. She gave me a warning look. I corrected myself. How did it feel? Her expression softened. Unsteady. Better after the first few minutes. That answer gave me less information than a number, and more information than any spreadsheet had. During the weeks she had been away, some of her endurance had dropped. Renee and Dr. Ortiz repeated her strength and balance assessments, then adjusted the plan around the goal Talia chose for herself. She did not write "walk normally" or "leave the wheelchair." She wanted to transfer her weight from one leg to the other, while supported in the frame without panicking when her body felt unfamiliar. Renee broke the task into smaller parts. Talia practiced finding pressure beneath each foot, shifting her hips a fraction to one side, and returning to center before fatigue changed the movement. Miles handled equipment and rhythm under Renee's direction, but he no longer stood at the center of every session. Some days Talia worked only with Renee. Some days she joined the adaptive group and treated Miles like any other member of the staff. Dr. Shaw developed a separate plan for the chimes, and Talia chose exactly what the rehabilitation team could know. Renee and Miles were told the sound must never be used without warning and that Talia could stop without explaining herself. During the first exposure, Dr. Shaw played one quiet metal note, then 3 with longer spaces. Talia came out pale and shaking. I stopped it, she said. Do you want to go home? Yes. She missed rehabilitation that afternoon. Renee moved the appointment. Dr. Ortiz approved the rest, and Miles sent only. Stopping is still a decision. 3 days later, Talia tried again. Some sessions ended after one note. In others, she stayed present long enough to name what she could see and feel in the room. By December, she could hear the 3 tones before a standing exercise, though once she chose not to enter the frame and another time asked to be lowered almost immediately. The point was never to finish every attempt. It was to learn that the sound did not choose for her. Her physical progress followed the same uneven pattern. She tolerated weight through both legs for longer periods. She learned to move her hips while her knees were supported, then to unload one foot enough for Renee to guide it a few inches forward. One afternoon, Miles watched her right knee drift inward and said the movement probably came from fatigue in the hip muscles. Renee checked Talia's alignment and shook her head. Not this time. The brace is sitting too low. Miles looked again, then adjusted it under Renee's direction. You're right, he said. I read the movement before checking the equipment. Talia raised an eyebrow. Should I mark the date? You can frame it. Renee corrected the brace, and the knee tracked more cleanly on the next shift. Miles did not defend himself. He stepped back and let Renee lead. After months of adults protecting their authority by denying what she experienced, Talia noticed how easily he admitted being wrong. Some days one leg responded and the other did not. Once, after 20 minutes of effort, she could not reproduce a movement she had completed the previous week. She struck the padded handle of the frame with her palm. I hate that yesterday gets to disappear. Renee did not tell her to stay positive. It happened yesterday, she said. Today is giving us different information. Talia looked toward the floor. That sounds like something my mom would put in a spreadsheet. When she told me about the session, I felt the old impulse to compare dates and search for a pattern. Instead, I asked, how did it feel when it wouldn't happen? Like my body changed the rules without telling me. Do you want to go back tomorrow? Yes, I'm still mad though. You can be both. By January, the movement in the frame had become more deliberate. With braces stabilizing her knees and ankles, Talia could shift her weight onto one side and help initiate the other leg forward. Renee still guided the limb. Her arms carried too much of her weight through the parallel bars, and every attempt cost more energy than the small distance suggested. The first intentional step happened on a gray afternoon when rain traced the gym windows. I was in the hallway when Renee came out and asked whether Talia wanted me inside. The question nearly stopped my breathing. I entered without taking out my phone. Talia stood between the parallel bars with braces on both legs. Renee guarded her hips. Miles stood nearby but did not touch her. Her face was flushed, and her arms trembled against the bars. We're not doing a show, she said. I know. She wants to try one more transfer, Renee explained. The goal is initiation, not distance. Talia shifted onto her left leg. Her right foot lightened against the floor. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then her hip turned, her knee released against the brace, and the foot slid forward under Renee's guidance. It was not independent walking. It was not smooth, and it did not carry her beyond the bars. It was one intentional beginning, supported by braces, equipment, training, and other people's hands. Talia exhaled sharply. Renee helped her return to the chair before exhaustion took the choice away. My mind reached for distance and labels. How did it feel? I asked. Talia rested her head against the chair. Like I told it to move, and part of it listened. That sounds exhausting. It was. I sat beside her without touching her until she reached for my hand. At home, turning forward remained on the drafting table. Talia replaced the damaged metal leaf and restored the wheel, but she refused to smooth the dent Celeste had made in the brass road. It still turns, she said. The dent is part of what happened to it. A letter from Marilyn arrived in February. Her apology filled 4 pages, but the first paragraph focused on how unbearable it had been to lose contact with her granddaughter. Talia read only the opening lines before returning the letter to its envelope. She's sorry she lost me, she said. that's not the same as being sorry for what she did. She placed it unopened in the bottom drawer. Arthur sent a shorter message, asking whether he could quietly attend one rehabilitation session. Talia typed her own reply. No, therapy is not where you get to prove something to me. She did not ask me to soften it. In March, Mrs. Alvarez invited Talia to display Turning Forward at the school's spring art exhibition. The original announcement draft described her as the courageous young artist who refused to let a wheelchair define her. Talia deleted the sentence. I'll show the piece, she told the teacher, but not if you say I beat my wheelchair. I still use it every day. Don't make it the bad guy. Mrs. Alvarez rewrote the program around the sculpture's design, materials, and movement. The exhibition space included a short, clear path between the display wall and the place where Talia's wheelchair would rest. By then, she could take several highly supported movements in controlled sessions, but she had never done so at school or in front of an audience. She studied the floor plan and looked at me. I might walk to the piece, she said. Or I might not. Both are allowed. No one announces it, no posters, no countdown, and no telling people they should stay for something special. I won't tell anyone. She folded the floor plan and placed it beside Turning Forward. At the exhibition, I decide. This time, I did not ask her to decide early so I could prepare. By April 2027, 19 months had passed since the crash, and Talia still used her wheelchair at school, in crowded places, and anywhere the distance demanded more energy than her body could safely give. She could stand with braces and a walker under controlled conditions. On stronger days, she could initiate several supported steps before her legs began to tremble. On other days, the signal between intention and movement arrived late or not at all. We no longer called one kind of day progress and the other failure. Several weeks before the spring exhibition, the principal civil settlement was approved. Celeste's automobile insurer covered a substantial share of Talia's projected rehabilitation, equipment, transportation, and accessibility needs, and Celeste contributed through the agreement. Structured payments would continue over time, while the separate agency review remained open. Dana explained the court-approved arrangement at our kitchen table, speaking directly to Talia. This money is not compensation for becoming a different person, she said. It is financial responsibility for costs that should never have rested entirely on your mother. Talia signed the acknowledgments appropriate for her age. I completed the remaining documents as her legal guardian. There was no moment when the check arrived, and grief became justice. Money could help pay for braces, therapy, chair repairs, and a home that worked with Talia instead of against her. It could not return the months she had spent wondering whether her own mind had betrayed her. The authorities were still reviewing the false report and the deletion of the media folder. Dana warned us that those decisions followed a separate process and might take much longer than the civil case. Talia did not ask for updates unless something required her participation. Celeste had lost several high-profile contracts after the gala recordings circulated among clients. Her business partners removed her from direct operations while the company restructured. She was not bankrupt, and her life had not vanished overnight. She simply no longer controlled every room through the version of herself she presented there. Marilyn sent letters through Dana because she was not permitted to contact Talia directly. Arthur sent none after Talia rejected his request to attend rehabilitation. Their silence sometimes hurt her. It never made her reconsider the boundary. They miss having access to me, she said once. That doesn't mean they understand me. She did not follow news about Celeste's company or search for the names of clients who had left. When strangers online praised her for destroying her aunt's reputation, Talia closed the screen. I made a sculpture, she told me. What happened to her business came from what she did, not from me. The spring exhibition opened on a Friday evening in the school arts building. Mrs. Alvarez had arranged the room so every display could be approached from a seated position. Turning Forward stood on a low pedestal near the center, placed at the eye level of someone using a wheelchair. The dent in the brass road remained visible beneath the gallery lights. Talia had repaired the wheel and replaced the twisted leaf, but she had refused to polish away the damage Celeste caused. The curved road no longer looked flawless. It still moved. Avery stood beside the pedestal, explaining the mechanism to two students from the ceramics class. "The wheel drives this small arm underneath," she said. "The spacing matters because each metal leaf has to sound separately." Talia changed the final angle after the brass got bent, and it made the movement less predictable. She did not mention the accident, rehabilitation, or courage. She spoke about balance, tension, sound, and design. Talia listened from several feet away with a small smile. "You approve?" I asked. She called my first version over-engineered. Was it? Completely. Near the rear wall, Renee spoke quietly with Dr. Ortiz. Miles stood beside them using his forearm crutch. They had come as invited guests, not as a treatment team preparing a demonstration. No one had been told whether Talia planned to walk. Her braces were hidden beneath loose trousers, and the walker waited folded behind a display screen. Her wheelchair remained where it belonged beneath her, not removed from sight to make the possibility of standing appear more dramatic. As the room filled, several guests approached, turning forward. Some turned the handle after reading the card that explained the mechanism. 3 chimes rang again and again through the gallery. Each time, I looked at Talia without meaning to. Sometimes, her fingers tightened briefly around her rims. Once she closed her eyes and breathed through the sound. She never left the room. The chimes still belonged to the night of the crash. Healing had not erased that connection. It had given her the power to decide what happened after she heard them. Halfway through the evening, Talia rolled toward me. "I'm going to try." I kept my face still. "What do you need?" "Bring the walker." Renee checks the braces. Miles stays near the right side, but he doesn't touch me unless Renee tells him to. "And me?" She looked toward turning forward. "Stand beside the pedestal, not in front of it." I followed every instruction exactly. Mrs. Alvarez quietly cleared the short path without announcing why. Avery redirected several guests toward another display. No one dimmed the lights or called for attention. Renee knelt beside Talia and checked each strap. Miles unfolded the walker and locked it into position. He stepped back when Renee finished, leaving the center of the space open. Talia transferred from her wheelchair to a stable bench with minimal help. She rested there while Renee positioned her feet, then pulled herself upward through the walker. Her arms shook immediately. The braces held her knees, but they did not make standing effortless. Her shoulders rose with each breath, and the muscles along her jaw tightened as she waited for her balance to settle. I stood beside the sculpture where she had told me to stand. A few guests noticed what was happening. The room gradually became quieter, not because anyone ordered silence, but because people understood that whatever Talia chose next did not belong to them. Renee asked, "Do you want to continue?" Talia nodded. Then she looked directly at me. "Don't count." The words reached backward, through every spreadsheet, every stopwatch, and every celebration I had forced upon her, before asking how she felt. "I won't," I said. She shifted her weight onto her left leg. Her right foot resisted, then moved beneath the brace with Renee guarding her hip. The walker advanced a few inches. Her first step was uneven. The second required a long pause. Her arms trembled harder, and Miles moved close enough to catch her without placing his hands on her body. Talia breathed through her teeth and shifted again. One foot moved, then the other. The distance between her wheelchair and turning forward was short enough that most people could cross it without noticing. For Talia, every movement required balance, concentration, equipment, and trust in a body that did not always answer in the same way twice. Her right knee drifted inward. Renee corrected the brace with one hand and asked whether she wanted to stop. "Not yet," Talia said. She moved again. I did not count. I watched her face instead. I saw effort gather around her eyes. I saw fear arrive when one foot dragged, then ease when the walker held. I saw her decide that difficulty was not the same as danger. After several imperfect steps, she reached the pedestal. Her hands were rigid around the walker. Sweat shone along her forehead, and her breathing had become shallow. Turning forward stood within reach. Talia looked at it, then at the empty distance remaining beside the display. She could have attempted another step. Everyone in the room would have understood why. Instead, she said, "I'm done." Renee nodded immediately. Miles brought the wheelchair forward only after Talia signaled to him. He positioned it behind her, then stepped away. Renee guarded the transfer while Talia lowered herself, shifted her weight, and returned to the chair with only the help she requested. The room stayed quiet while Avery covered her mouth. Mrs. Alvarez wiped her eyes, and Dr. Ortiz smiled without moving closer. The silence gave Talia room to breathe. Talia rested until her breathing slowed. Then she rolled toward turning forward. The brass handle was level with her hand. She wrapped her fingers around it and turned. The hidden arm moved beneath the sculpture. The first metal leaf sounded, followed by the second and the third. 3 soft chimes traveled through the gallery. Talia's shoulders tightened, and for 1 second the wet road and blue light returned to her face. She kept her hand on the wheel until the mechanism stopped, then turned it again more slowly, choosing the speed of each note. I moved beside her. She looked up at me, her face exhausted and calm. I did not tell her she had come back. She had never disappeared. I did not tell her the steps proved anything about the rest of her life. "I'm here," I said. She nodded. "I know." When the exhibition ended, Miles remained near the pedestal speaking with Renee. He did not follow us to the exit or turn Talia's steps into a victory that belonged to him. Avery walked with us as far as the front doors, still arguing that the original wheel had been unnecessarily complicated. Talia insisted the mechanism had needed complexity before she understood what it was meant to do. Outside, the April air was cool and damp. The pavement reflected the building lights, but no rain had begun. Talia placed both hands on her rims and moved toward the parking lot. I walked beside her without pushing, matching the speed she chose. She did not leave the chair behind. She left behind the belief that there was only one way to move forward.